An 11-year-old girl sits bound in a stranger's van, her heart pounding so hard she can hear it in her ears. But instead of screaming or crying, she closes her eyes and remembers something Detective Sarah Mitchell said on her favorite show. The mind is your most powerful weapon when your body can't fight back. What this child did next saved her life in ways no adult could have imagined. She turned everything she learned from late-night crime shows into a psychological chess match against a predator who thought he held all the power. But to understand how an 11-year-old outsmarted a dangerous criminal, we need to go back to where it all began. Meet Emily Chun, though that's not her real name. In the summer of 2019, she was just like any other 11-year-old in the quiet suburb of Millbrook Heights. She collected stickers, loved art projects, and had an unusual obsession with true crime television shows. Every Tuesday night, Emily would sneak downstairs after her parents thought she was asleep to watch Criminal Minds Decoded on the living room TV. Her mother would find her the next morning, curled up on the couch with a blanket, having absorbed another episode about psychological profiling and criminal behavior. "Emily, those shows will give you nightmares," her mother would say. But Emily never had nightmares. Instead, she had notebooks filled with what she called detective notes, observations about how criminals think, how they choose victims, and most importantly, how survivors escape. Millbrook Heights was the kind of place where people left their doors unlocked and children rode bikes until streetlights came on. Crime was something that happened in other places, to other families. The most excitement the town had seen in years was Mrs. Patterson's garden gnome going missing, only to be found 3 days later in the Henderson's flower bed. But on August 15th, 2019, that peaceful bubble was about to burst. Earlier that day, Mrs. Rodriguez had called the police about a white van circling the neighborhood. "It's been driving by every hour," she told Officer Martinez. "The driver keeps looking at the houses, like he's studying them." The report was filed, noted, and forgotten. After all, it could have been anyone: a delivery driver, a contractor, someone visiting family. In a town like Millbrook Heights, suspicion felt almost rude. Emily spent that evening in her room, working on a friendship bracelet for her best friend Maya. The window was cracked open to let in the warm summer breeze, and she could hear the distant sound of other children playing in their yards. She had no idea that by the time those street lights came on, she would be miles away, fighting for her life. What she also didn't know was that the white van had been watching her house specifically. The man behind the wheel had been planning this for weeks. The first thing Emily noticed wasn't the sound of breaking glass or footsteps on the stairs. It was the smell. She was hunched over her craft table, carefully threading another blue bead onto the bracelet, when a strange odor drifted through her open window, gasoline mixed with something else she couldn't identify. It was sharp and wrong in a way that made her pause mid-stitch. Emily had learned from her crime shows that survivors always remembered the details others missed. She set down her bracelet and listened. The normal evening sounds of her neighborhood had gone quiet. No children laughing, no dogs barking, no distant television sets murmuring through open windows. Then she heard it, the soft creak of the back door opening. Her parents were at their weekly book club meeting at the library. They wouldn't be home for another hour. Emily's blood went cold as she remembered Detective Mitchell's voice. Predators study their victims' routines. They know when you're most vulnerable. Heavy footsteps moved through the kitchen below. Whoever was in her house was trying to be quiet, but Emily could hear every floorboard groan under their weight. She grabbed her phone and started to dial 911, but the screen went black. Dead battery. The footsteps were on the stairs now. Emily's training from countless crime show episodes kicked in. She couldn't run. There was nowhere to go. Her window faced a 20-foot drop to concrete, but she could hide and observe. She slipped behind her bedroom door just as it swung open. The man who entered was tall and thin, wearing dark clothes and surgical gloves. A black ski mask covered his face, but Emily could see his eyes through the holes, pale blue, and scanning her room methodically. That gasoline smell was stronger now, coming from his jacket. When he realized the room appeared empty, he relaxed slightly. That's when Emily saw it, a distinctive scar running along the back of his left hand, shaped like a lightning bolt. She memorized it instantly. "I know you're here, Emily," he said quietly. His voice was surprisingly soft, almost gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you. I just need you to come with me." Emily's heart nearly stopped. He knew her name. This wasn't random. She pressed herself deeper into the shadows behind the door, but he was already turning toward her hiding spot. His pale eyes met hers through the gap between the door and frame. "There you are." What happened next was a blur of movement and terror. Strong hands pulled her from behind the door. She tried to scream, but a chemical-soaked cloth covered her mouth and nose. The last thing she remembered before everything went dark was the sound of her friendship bracelets scattering across the hardwood floor, blue beads rolling in every direction. When Emily woke up, she was in the back of a white van, her hands and feet bound with zip ties. The vehicle was moving, and through the small back window, she could see the lights of her town growing smaller and smaller. But Emily wasn't panicking. Instead, she was doing exactly what Detective Mitchell had taught her. She was observing everything. The van finally stopped after what felt like hours, but was probably only 30 minutes. Emily had been awake for most of the drive, carefully noting every detail she could gather without alerting her captor that she was conscious. The van's interior was gray cloth with several burn marks on the ceiling. There were crumpled fast food wrappers on the floor, McDonald's and Taco Bell, and the faint smell of cigarettes mixed with that gasoline odor from his jacket. Most importantly, when they passed under a streetlight, Emily caught a partial view of the license plate. It started with KR7 and had what looked like a faded bumper sticker of a fishing logo. Her captor parked and came around to open the back doors. "We're here," he said in that same unnervingly soft voice. "I'm going to carry you inside, and I need you to stay very quiet. If you scream or try to run, this will become much more difficult for both of us." Emily nodded, playing along. From her crime shows, she knew that compliance early on could lower a predator's guard and create opportunities later. He lifted her easily. Emily was small for her age, and carried her toward what looked like a detached garage behind a rundown house. The property was isolated, surrounded by tall trees and overgrown grass. No neighbors in sight. Inside the garage, Emily's heart sank. This wasn't a crime of opportunity. The space had been prepared for her. A sleeping bag was laid out in one corner, along with bottles of water and prepackaged snacks. Extension cords ran across the concrete floor to power a small television and a space heater. There were chemical supplies on metal shelving, the source of that gasoline smell, and various tools hanging on pegboards. But what disturbed Emily most was a bulletin board covered with photographs. Not of her, but of other children, girls around her age, all with dark hair like hers, all smiling in what looked like school photos or family pictures. The man noticed her staring at the board. "Don't worry about them," he said, setting her down on the sleeping bag. "They're safe now, just like you're going to be." Emily felt sick, but forced herself to stay calm. She counted 7 photos on that board. 7 other girls who looked just like her. "What's your name?" she asked quietly, remembering Detective Mitchell's advice about humanizing yourself to captors. The man paused while checking the zip ties around her wrists. "You can call me David," he said after a moment. Emily could tell it wasn't his real name, but at least she had something to call him. "David, I'm scared," she said truthfully. "My parents are probably looking for me." "They won't find you here," David replied, not unkindly. "But that's okay. You're going to like it here once you get used to it." The other girls did. The way he said other girls made Emily's blood run cold. Past tense. She thought about those 7 photos and what safe now might really mean. David turned on the small television. A local news channel was running a breaking news story. 11-year-old Emily Chun reported missing from Millbrook Heights home. Police are asking anyone with information. Emily's school photo filled the screen, the same one she'd seen on David's bulletin board. "They work fast," David muttered, changing the channel. "But it doesn't matter. By tomorrow night, we'll be long gone from here." Tomorrow night. Emily realized she had less than 24 hours to figure out how to survive this. She closed her eyes and tried to remember everything Detective Mitchell had ever said about psychological manipulation and building rapport with dangerous individuals. Her life depended on becoming the best student she'd ever been. Emily spent the first few hours pretending to sleep while David worked at a cluttered desk in the corner of the garage. She watched through barely opened eyes as he sorted through papers, made notes, and occasionally glanced over at her. Around what she estimated was midnight, David's cell phone rang. "Yeah, I got her," he said quietly, turning away from Emily's sleeping area. "No problems. Tomorrow night, like we discussed. Midnight at the usual spot." No, she's perfect. Exactly what he wanted. Emily's blood turned to ice. He was talking about selling her to someone else. Tomorrow at midnight. The price is still the same? David continued. Good. I'll have her ready for transport. Transport. Like she was cargo instead of a human being. When David hung up, Emily forced herself to breathe normally and keep her eyes closed. But her mind was racing. She had roughly 18 hours before she would be handed over to someone even worse than David. The thought of those 7 photos on the bulletin board took on a horrifying new meaning. She needed to start building a connection with David immediately. After waiting another hour, Emily stirred and made soft crying sounds. David looked over from his desk. "Hey," he said, approaching her sleeping bag. "Are you okay?" Emily looked up at him with wide, frightened eyes. "I had a nightmare," she whispered, "about my parents. Are they okay?" Something flickered across David's face. Surprise, maybe even sympathy. "They're fine," he said. "They just miss you." "I miss them too," Emily said, letting real tears come. "David, why did you take me? Did I do something wrong?" David knelt beside her sleeping bag. Without the ski mask, Emily could see he was younger than she'd expected, maybe in his late 20s, with thin brown hair and those unsettling pale blue eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said. "You're special, Emily. Someone very important wants to meet you." "Who?" Emily asked innocently. David hesitated. "Someone who will take very good care of you. Better care than your parents ever could." Emily had seen enough crime shows to recognize the language of traffickers. They always justified their actions by claiming they were helping their victims. But she played along. "Will I ever see my parents again?" she asked. "Probably not," David said with what seemed like genuine regret. "But you'll understand someday. When you're older." Emily let herself cry harder, and David actually reached out to pat her shoulder awkwardly. "Hey, don't cry. I know this is scary, but I promise nothing bad will happen to you." That physical contact was important. It meant David was starting to see her as a person rather than just cargo. Emily filed that information away. "David," she said after a few minutes, "can I ask you something?" "Sure. Are you going to hurt me?" David looked genuinely shocked. "No, I would never hurt you, Emily. I'm not a monster." Emily could tell he believed that. In his twisted mind, he was helping these children, not destroying their lives. That delusion was something she could work with. "Okay," she said, wiping her eyes. "I believe you." For the first time since entering the garage, David smiled. It was a sad, lonely smile that reminded Emily he was probably as broken as he was dangerous. "Thank you for believing me," he said quietly. "Most people don't understand what I do." Emily nodded as if she understood too. Inside, she was making mental notes about everything: his need for validation, his desire to be seen as a protector rather than a predator, his loneliness. By the time David returned to his desk, Emily was already formulating a plan. She had 17 hours to convince David that selling her would be the worst mistake he could make. Her survival depended on making him believe they were friends. Emily spent the morning hours carefully studying David's routines and emotional patterns. He was methodical but anxious, checking his phone constantly and pacing when he thought she wasn't watching. Every few hours, he would offer her food or water with an almost desperate politeness, as if her acceptance validated his self-image as a caregiver. This was her opening. "David," Emily said around noon, as he handed her a peanut butter sandwich. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." Emily took a small bite and looked up at him with the most trusting expression she could manage. "I was really scared last night, but you've been so nice to me. Nicer than a lot of adults." David's face lit up with surprise and pleasure. "Really, really," Emily said. My dad yells at me sometimes when I get bad grades. And my mom is always too busy with work to really listen to me. But you actually care about how I'm feeling." This was a complete lie. Emily's parents were loving and attentive, but she watched David's chest puff up with pride. "I do care, Emily. That's why I'm doing this. The person you're going to meet tonight, he has so much more to offer you than your parents ever could." "What's his name?" Emily asked casually. David hesitated. "I can't tell you that yet, but he's very wealthy, very powerful. He can give you things your parents never could." Emily nodded thoughtfully. "David, can I ask you something personal?" "Sure. Do you have kids of your own?" David's expression darkened. "No, that never worked out for me." Emily could see pain in his pale eyes. "Another piece of information to use." "I'm sorry," she said softly. "You would be a really good dad, though. You're patient and kind." David actually blushed. "You think so?" "I know so," Emily said. "You rescued me from a house where nobody really understood me, and now you're making sure I'm safe and fed. That's what good fathers do." She watched David process this reframing of his crimes. In his mind, he wasn't a kidnapper. He was a rescuer. Emily was validating the narrative he'd probably told himself about all those other girls. "Emily," David said quietly, "would you like to watch some TV together? I could untie your hands so you can eat more easily." This was exactly what Emily had been hoping for. "Really? That would be nice." David carefully cut the zip ties around her wrists, leaving only the ones around her ankles. Emily rubbed her wrists and smiled at him gratefully. "Thank you, David. I promise I won't try to run away or anything. I trust you." They sat together on an old couch David had dragged into the garage, watching reruns of family sitcoms. Emily made sure to laugh at the jokes and occasionally comment on how nice the TV family seemed. "David," she said during a commercial break, "the person I'm meeting tonight, does he have other kids living with him?" "A few," David said carefully. "Are they happy?" David seemed to struggle with that question. I think so. He takes very good care of them." Emily could hear the doubt in his voice. She pressed a little harder. "It's just that leaving you would be really hard," she said. "You're the first adult who's ever really listened to me. I wish I could stay here with you instead." David stared at her in shock. "You want to stay here? Is that crazy?" Emily asked, tilting her head. "I know this place isn't fancy, but it feels safe. And you feel safe." For a moment, David looked like he might cry. "Emily, the arrangements are already made. I can't just." "I understand," Emily said quickly. "I know you have to do what's best for me. I just wanted you to know that if I could choose, I'd choose to stay with you." She watched David's internal struggle play out across his face. For the first time since taking her, he was questioning his plan. Emily pressed her advantage. "David, those other girls in the pictures, do you miss them?" David looked toward the bulletin board. "Every day," he admitted quietly. "Then why did you let them go?" "Because," David started, then stopped. "Because I thought it was what was best for them." "Were they happy when they left?" David was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "I don't know. I never heard from them again." Emily nodded sadly. "That must be really hard, caring about someone and then never knowing if they're okay." She could see tears forming in David's eyes. The psychological pressure was working. She just needed to push a little more. "David, if you let that man take me tonight, will you miss me too?" "Yes," he whispered. "Then why are you doing it?" David didn't have an answer for that question. Emily could see everything she'd said swirling around in his mind, challenging the narrative he'd built to justify his actions. She had planted the seeds of doubt. Now she just had to wait for them to grow. As evening approached, David became increasingly agitated. He paced the garage, checked his phone obsessively, and kept glancing between Emily and the bulletin board of photos. The internal conflict Emily had created was tearing him apart. "David," Emily said softly, "are you okay?" He stopped pacing and looked at her. "Emily, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." "Okay. Do you really want to stay here with me? Or are you just saying that because you're scared?" This was the crucial moment. Emily looked directly into his pale blue eyes and spoke with complete sincerity. "David, I've never lied to you, and I won't start now. When you first took me, I was terrified. I didn't understand why you would want me or what was going to happen. But these past days, you've shown me more kindness than most adults in my life." She paused, letting her words sink in. "I know what you do might seem wrong to other people, but I think you save kids like me. Kids who don't fit in their regular lives. And if staying here with you means I get to be around someone who actually cares about me, then yes, I really want to stay." David stared at her for a long moment, then sat down heavily on the couch. "Emily, there's something I need to tell you about the other girls." Emily's heart began to race, but she kept her expression calm and interested. "The man I'm supposed to give you to tonight, he's not what I told you. He doesn't take care of children. David's voice broke. "He hurts them, Emily. And I've been telling myself for so long that I was helping, that I was saving girls like you from unhappy homes, but really I was feeding them to a monster." Emily reached out and took David's hand. "David, you didn't know." "I didn't know," he said, tears streaming down his face. "Deep down, I always knew. But I needed the money, and I told myself that maybe their lives were bad enough that even what happened to them was better than where they came from." Emily squeezed his hand. "What happened to them, David?" David shook his head. "I don't know. After I handed them over, they disappeared. But there were news stories, missing children reports that stopped being updated. And I knew, but I kept doing it because I'm a coward." Emily felt sick, thinking about those 7 photos on the wall. 7 girls who had trusted David the way she was pretending to trust him. 7 girls who were probably dead. But she couldn't let her disgust show, not when she was so close to saving herself. "David," she said gently, "you're not a coward. You're telling me the truth right now, even though it hurts. That's brave." "I can't let him take you, Emily," David said suddenly. "I can't do that to you. Not after you've been so kind to me." Emily's heart leaped, but she forced herself to stay calm. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm going to call him and tell him the deal is off. I'm going to take you home to your parents." "Really?" Emily allowed herself to look hopeful. "Really," David said, reaching for his phone. "I should have done this years ago." But as David dialed, Emily heard something that made her blood turn to ice. The sound of car engines outside. Multiple cars, moving slowly and quietly. David heard it too. He went to the small garage window and peeked through the curtain. His face went white. "Police," he whispered. "They found us." Emily's mind raced. David was about to release her voluntarily, but now the police were here. If they stormed in, David might panic and do something desperate. She needed to keep him calm. "David," she said urgently, "put the phone down and untie my feet. If you let me go right now, when the police come in, I'll tell them you were helping me escape. I'll tell them you saved me." David stared at her. "You would do that? After what I told you about the other girls?" "You were going to let me go home," Emily said. "You chose to do the right thing. That has to count for something." Outside, they could hear car doors slamming and voices shouting instructions. David quickly cut the zip ties around Emily's ankles. "Emily, I'm so sorry for everything. For taking you, for scaring you, for what happened to those other girls. I know you probably hate me." Emily stood up on shaky legs. "I don't hate you, David. I think you're a person who got lost and did terrible things, but you found your way back. That's what matters now." The garage door exploded inward as police officers stormed inside, weapons drawn. "Get on the ground. Get on the ground now." David immediately dropped to his knees and put his hands behind his head. "Don't shoot. I'm not armed. The girl is okay." Emily ran toward the police officers, but as they cuffed David, she turned back to him. "Thank you for letting me go home," she said. David nodded, tears still streaming down his face. "Take care of yourself, Emily." As the police led David away, Emily realized something that chilled her. She had genuinely started to care about him. Despite everything he'd done, despite the 7 girls whose fate she could only imagine, she had seen a broken, lonely person underneath the monster. And that scared her more than anything else that had happened in that garage. The reunion with her parents was everything Emily had dreamed about during her captivity. Her mother collapsed to her knees in the hospital parking lot, sobbing as she held Emily tight. Her father, usually so controlled and stoic, wept openly as he wrapped both of them in his arms. "We thought we'd lost you forever," her mother whispered. "When we came home and found your room empty, your bracelet scattered on the floor." Emily pulled back to look at her parents, really look at them. After David's claims about their neglect and inattention, she could see clearly how wrong he'd been. These people had spent 36 hours in absolute hell, coordinating with police, organizing search parties, calling every hospital within a 100-mile radius. "I'm okay," Emily said firmly. "I'm home now." The police interviews were extensive, but handled with care. Detective Sarah Martinez, not Mitchell, Emily noted with irony, was patient and thorough as Emily recounted every detail of her abduction and captivity. "Emily, you showed incredible courage," Detective Martinez said. "The way you gathered information about the vehicle, the license plate, your captor's appearance, that's what led us to you. Most adults wouldn't have had that presence of mind." Emily shifted uncomfortably. "I watch a lot of crime shows." "We noticed." Detective Martinez smiled. "Your parents mentioned your interest in true crime. It might have saved your life." But Emily wasn't sure she felt like a hero. As Detective Martinez continued asking questions about David's behavior, his phone calls, his emotional state, Emily found herself painting a picture that was more complex than the simple predator narrative everyone expected. "He was going to let me go," Emily said quietly. "Right before you arrived, he was going to call off the meeting and take me home." Detective Martinez frowned. "Emily, sometimes captors will say things like that to manipulate their victims. It's called Stockholm Syndrome." "I know what Stockholm Syndrome is," Emily said. This was different. He was genuinely remorseful about the other girls. He wanted to stop. "What other girls?" Detective Martinez leaned forward intently. Emily told her about the bulletin board, the 7 photographs, David's confession about what happened to his previous victims. She watched Detective Martinez's expression grow more and more grim. "Emily, this information is crucial for our investigation. David Kellerman is connected to at least 7 missing children cases across 3 states. Your testimony could help us solve those cases and bring closure to other families." Emily nodded, but part of her felt sick. By cooperating with police, she was ensuring David would spend the rest of his life in prison, which was appropriate and necessary, but it still felt like a betrayal after the connection they'd formed. "Detective Martinez," Emily said, "what will happen to David?" "He'll be charged with kidnapping, child trafficking, and likely multiple counts of murder once we investigate those other cases. He's looking at life in prison without parole." Emily was quiet for a moment. "He saved my life at the end. Doesn't that count for anything?" Detective Martinez studied Emily carefully. "Honey, I know this is confusing. Sometimes when we're in traumatic situations, we start to feel grateful to people who hurt us, especially if they show us small kindnesses. But David Kellerman kidnapped you. He was planning to sell you to someone who would have hurt you terribly. The fact that he changed his mind at the last minute doesn't erase those crimes." Emily knew Detective Martinez was right, but it didn't make the situation feel any less complicated. Over the following weeks, as Emily tried to return to normal life, the case continued to unfold. David's cooperation with police led to the arrest of 3 other men involved in the trafficking ring, including the buyer who had been expecting Emily that night. The search for the 7 missing girls yielded heartbreaking results. 6 bodies were found in various locations across the region. Only one girl, disappeared 3 months earlier, was found alive, rescued from a basement in Pennsylvania, where she'd been held by the same buyer David had been working with. Emily followed the news obsessively, her notebooks now filled with real case details instead of fictional crime show plots. When she learned about the rescued girl, a 12-year-old named Sophia, Emily asked her parents if she could visit her in the hospital. "I just want to tell her that she's safe now," Emily explained, "and that someone understands what she went through." The meeting was arranged through the FBI Victim Services, with counselors present. Sophia was thin and traumatized, barely speaking above a whisper. But when Emily sat beside her hospital bed and took her hand, Sophia looked directly at her for the first time. "Did the man with the pale eyes take you too?" Sophia asked quietly. Emily nodded. but we're both safe now, and he can't hurt anyone else. Sophia squeezed Emily's hand. I wanted to die in that basement, but I kept thinking about my little brother and how scared he would be if I never came home. What kept me going was remembering everything I learned from crime shows, Emily said, about how to survive, how to stay strong, how to pay attention to details that could help police find you. Sophia smiled for the first time since Emily had entered the room. I like crime shows too. Maybe we could watch one together sometime. I'd like that, Emily said, but maybe something light, like a comedy show instead. Both girls laughed, and Emily realized something important. Her ordeal had changed her relationship with true crime forever. The fascination was still there, but now it was tempered with real understanding of the human cost behind those cases. She was no longer just a consumer of crime stories. She had become part of one. 2 years later, Emily stood in a courtroom wearing her best dress, facing a judge in a room full of strangers. David Kellerman sat at the defendant's table in an orange jumpsuit, looking smaller and more frail than she remembered. Ms. Chun, the judge said kindly, you may read your victim impact statement. Emily looked down at the paper in her hands, then at David. He met her eyes briefly before looking away. Your Honor, Emily began, her voice steady and clear. 2 years ago, David Kellerman kidnapped me from my home and held me captive for 36 hours. He planned to sell me to a man who would have hurt me in ways I still can't fully imagine. Because of his actions, I spent days in the hospital, months in therapy, and I still have nightmares sometimes. She paused, seeing David's shoulders slump with each word. But I also need to tell you about something else that happened during those 36 hours. At the end, when Mr. Kellerman realized what he was really doing, not just to me, but to all the children he had hurt before me, he made a choice to stop. He was going to let me go home. Murmurs rippled through the courtroom. Emily continued, I'm not saying this to excuse what he did. 7 children died because of his choices. 7 families lost their daughters forever. That's unforgivable, and he deserves to be punished for it. Emily looked directly at David now. But I'm alive because at the very end, he remembered how to be human again. And maybe that matters too. The judge sentenced David Kellerman to life in prison without the possibility of parole. As the bailiffs led him away, David turned back one more time to look at Emily. She nodded at him slightly. Not forgiveness exactly, but acknowledgement of the complexity of what had passed between them. After the trial, Emily's parents took her out for ice cream, a tradition they'd started after every difficult milestone in her recovery process. Are you okay, sweetheart? Her mother asked. That was incredibly brave what you did in there. Emily considered the question seriously. I think so. It felt important to tell the whole truth, not just the easy parts. The easy parts? Her father asked. The part where I'm the victim and he's the monster, Emily said. That's true, but it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is messier and harder to understand. Her parents exchanged a look over her head. Emily knew they worried about her sometimes, about how the experience had changed her. She'd stopped watching true crime shows, started seeing a therapist twice a week, and became fiercely protective of other children in ways that sometimes surprised adults. Just last month, she noticed a man following her friend, Maya, home from school. Instead of ignoring it or hoping she was wrong, Emily had called the police immediately. The man turned out to be a registered sex offender who had been stalking several children in the area. Trust your instincts, Detective Martinez had told her when she commended Emily for the call. Your experience taught you things most people never learn. Use that knowledge to help others. Now, sitting in the ice cream parlor with her parents, Emily realized she'd made a decision about her future. Mom, Dad, she said, stirring her strawberry ice cream thoughtfully. I think I want to be a police detective when I grow up. Someone who helps find missing children. Her parents looked concerned. Honey, are you sure? After everything you've been through? Because of everything I've been through, Emily corrected. I understand things about victims and criminals that other detectives might miss. I could help solve cases that seem impossible. Her father reached across the table to take her hand. You know we'll support whatever you decide to do with your life. But you don't have to let what happened to you define your future. Emily smiled. I'm not letting it define my future, Dad. I'm choosing to let it inform my future. There's a difference. 5 years later, 18-year-old Emily Chun was accepted into a specialized program for gifted students interested in criminal justice. She'd volunteered with victim services, shadowed detectives during Ride-Out. If this story moved you, if it made you think about the young people in your own community who might be vulnerable to predatory groups, then share it with someone who needs to hear it. Comment below and tell us, what would you do if someone you love vanished without a trace? How far would you go to bring them home? Subscribe for more true crime stories that matter, stories that remind us why we must never stop fighting for the missing, the lost, and the forgotten. Because sometimes, one person's refusal to give up can change everything. Thank you for listening, and remember, love is the most powerful force in the world, strong enough to reach across any distance, survive any separation, and bring even the lost souls home.